Hi guys, I'm very sorry I can't be there with you today, but what I have done is I have recorded this lesson for you. So I'll be talking through the history, and there'll be a number of tasks throughout the lesson. And what the teacher will do is when there is a task, they'll pause the video so you can complete that task, and then resume it, and then we'll do that throughout the lesson. Okay, but the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to write the date and title of this lesson, which is Course 3 and then dash finance. So if the teacher could just pause the video for 2 minutes, and in silence, everyone is going to write nice and neatly the title, the date, and then actually, if you're a fast finisher, you can write that definition below as well. So pause the video now for 2 minutes. Okay, now that we have the date and title, we can get started with this lesson. And this lesson is all about looking at another one of the causes of the Civil War, which was finance. And finance is all about the control of how large amounts of money should be spent. Now, in the 1600s, the monarch collected taxes from everyone in the country, which would then be spent as they wished, which spent as how the monarch wished. But in general, people do not like paying taxes. Here's what I'd like you to do now. Just on your own for a moment, think about these two questions. What do you think the monarchs were expected to spend money on in the 1600s? And then, secondly, what would they have spent money on in reality? What kind of spending would have upset people? Just think about those two questions on your own for a moment. Okay, and now, once the video is paused, you're going to turn and talk to the person next to you and discuss those two questions. What do you think monarchs were expected to spend money on? And what would they have actually spent money on? And what kind of spending would have upset people? If the teacher could now pause the video for 2 minutes, and you can now talk to your partners. Okay, hopefully you've had a nice, interesting discussion on this, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some very contrasting views out there. Um, but in this period, monarchs were expected to spend money on lavish parties and expensive homes. Okay, people sort of expected that from a monarch, but it was also important to make sure that the taxes that people were paying were fair so that people had enough money to eat and to just survive. So if a monarch is spending loads and loads and loads of money on lavish stuff, then they're going to need lots of taxes. But if people are going to have to pay lots of taxes, they are going to struggle just to meet their basic needs and struggle to survive. Well, Charles I was known for being a bit of a spenderholic. He loved spending loads of money, and therefore he would need lots of taxes. So at the bottom of the screen, you can see some of the lavish things that Charles I spent money on. So there's Queen's House in Greenwich, there's Banqueting House in Westminster, and he also was a big fan of art and spent thousands of pounds on building up a very luxurious art collection. So you can see how this down the line is going to create significant tension between Charles and, do you remember which group are responsible for taxes? Parliament. Parliament. So here's what I'd like you to do now. Using a whole page of your exercise book in landscape, I'd like you to draw this line down the middle with the two headings on either side. So money problems were Charles I's fault, and Charles I was unlucky on the other side. So if the teacher could pause the video now just for a minute and a half so everyone can get that drawn in their books. Okay, So hopefully everyone's got a nice, neat, straight line on a whole page of their books ready to go. This is a scale that we are going to use as we look at a series of different pieces of evidence. Okay. For each piece of evidence, you need to decide whether this evidence is an example of, well, money problems were completely Charles I's fault, or whether Charles I was just very unlucky. Okay, so I'll give you an example of how I'd like you to do this. This is evidence A. Elizabeth I ruled England for nearly 50 years until 1603 and kept taxes very low to keep Parliament happy. This was not sustainable, as in, like, she wouldn't be able to keep this up long term, but Parliament had gotten used to low taxes. So, do we think this is completely Charles I's fault, or was Charles I unlucky? Well, in this situation, I think Charles I was completely unlucky here. He wasn't the one responsible for keeping taxes low during that whole time. So I've put A, because it was evidence A, right on the far right of my scale, because I think Charles I was completely unlucky there. Okay? And so what you need to do now, as I go through each piece of evidence, just write the letter on the scale of whether you think it was Charles I's fault or whether he was unlucky. Are we ready to go? Yes, here we go. So, oh, we've done that one, haven't we? Evidence B. Evidence B. James I had expensive tastes and left Charles I with lots of debts. James I spent over 10 million in modern money on clothing alone. So just spend a moment, decide where that goes on your scale, and put the letter B. Okay, let's move on. Evidence C. In 1626, Charles I forced everyone to pay a special tax, which was very large. The forced loan was designed to pay for any foreign wars. So again, is Charles unlucky, or is this Charles's fault? Put it on the scale. Okay, next one. Evidence D. In 1636, Charles I made everyone pay a medieval tax called ship money. This was outdated and made people very angry. Charles I's fault, or is he unlucky? You decide, put a D on the scale where you think it belongs. Evidence E. Charles I and his wife Henrietta Maria loved art and spent lots of money building the most impressive art collection in the world. So, again, evidence E. Is he unlucky? Is this Charles I's fault? Put it on your scale now. Okay, evidence F. Charles I had 7 palaces, more than his father, and spent 40% of his money on his household. This was very high. Once again, put the letter F. Is he unlucky, or is this completely Charles's fault? You decide. Okay, next one. Evidence G. James I often gave money to his friends, who were often Scottish. Parliament did not like giving money to James I for his friends. Ooh, a bit more complex this. So is this Charles I's fault, or is he unlucky? Okay, and I think this is the last one. Evidence H. Charles I started the Bishops' Wars by trying to bring in his Book of Prayer. This forced him to recall Parliament in 1640 to ask for money. Is this Charles I's fault, or is he unlucky? Put that on your scale now. Okay, so here's the scale I put together. I don't know whether it's similar to yours. I mean, there's a broad range there. There are certainly 3 pieces of evidence which suggest he was very unlucky, but there are some elements where he was excessive or where it was just his fault. He was spending way too much money. Okay. So overall, have a think to yourself. Do you think Charles I was unlucky? Okay. And then what I'd like you to do is explain your answer in 2 to 3 sentences in your book. So if the teacher could pause the video now for, I would say, 3 minutes and then explain your answer. Do you think Charles I was unlucky? Okay, hopefully you didn't find that task too challenging. Here's my view on this situation. So, in many ways, I do think Charles I was unlucky. For example, it wasn't his fault his father had given lots of money to his friends, and it wasn't his fault that Elizabeth I had created a culture in which Parliament were used to having very low taxes. However, Charles I did make the situation far worse with his excessive spending and an elaborate lifestyle, which was completely unnecessary. So that's my view. Let's find out what happens next in terms of his relationship with Parliament. So, in 1640, due to his fight with the bishops' wars, Charles I was forced to recall Parliament after 11 years of ignoring them. Remember, he'd essentially shut down Parliament for 11 years, which is a very long time. This had led to a build-up of anger and fear among the members of Parliament. Charles I then went to them to ask for more money for his war in Scotland. How likely do you think Parliament were to give Charles I his money? Just think for yourself for a moment. Okay, I can tell you. They were in no way interested in giving him his money at all. So instead of giving him money, Parliament issued something called the Grand Remonstrance. This was a list of complaints against Charles I, and it demanded that he share power more often and stop spending so much. John Pym was one of the leaders of Parliament and strongly argued that the king needed to change his ways. Parliament debated what to demand from the king, and it was only agreed by 159 votes to 148. This debate split Parliament into two groups. These groups would fight for and against the king in 1642. So, here's what I'd like you to do. There are two questions at the bottom of the screen. I'd like you to spend the next 4 minutes answering both those questions in full sentences in your book. So if you're unsure of the question, make sure you read the text on the screen. The answers lie within. So if the teacher could now pause the video for 4 minutes so everyone can answer those questions in their books. Okay, hopefully you've answered those two questions. So question number one, the answer is obviously Parliament issued the Grand Remonstrance, which listed a series of complaints against the king. And what problem did this cause for Parliament? Well, it caused a complete split in Parliament. Those who supported the king and those who were against the king. And so now Parliament is divided, which is going to cause a lot of issues in the future. So, now for your final task, I'd like you to do the following. I'd like you to explain which of these three factors caused the most tension between Charles I and Parliament. Okay? And within this, you need to give lots of explanation. You're not just going to describe it. I want you to give lots of different reasons why you think the factor you have chosen is the most important or caused the most tension. If you're a fast finisher at the end, you can complete the task at the bottom which is which of those factors do you think caused the least amount of tension? All right. And those factors are absolutism. Remember that belief that a monarch has absolute power and doesn't have to listen to anyone but himself, religion, and of course, the factor that we've been looking at today, finance. Okay. So I anticipate this should take approximately, let's have a think. I'd like people to spend 10 minutes doing this. So you're doing a real proper job of explaining which of those factors you think cause the most tension. And then if you finish early, you're going to complete that fast finisher task at the bottom. So if you can pause the video now for 10 minutes and then resume once we've finished. Okay, that brings us to the end of this lesson. I hope you found it interesting and haven't found this format too weird. Um, hopefully, I will be posting some homework related to this on Show My Homework this week. Other than that, we're done for today. Have a great rest of your afternoon.